So we're going to start before heading to the second panel. It's a pleasure for us to have some images of a young change maker, Fatima Zamba. Please, the video.
My name is Fatima Zamba and I come from Morocco. I work in the area of public innovation and my interests revolve around citizen participation, collective intelligence, how to get people to work together, how to get companies and governments to leverage the collective intelligence of the people around them to solve complex problems. I guess that I came to the summit with the expectation that I will learn about the MEM region. What are the issues, what are the problems that the different countries are dealing with? But I think that I'm coming out with more than that. I'm coming out with the human stories that I learned from participants. Refugees fleeing their countries and going to seek refugee abroad, and people who never really had a chance to even live in their own countries, not by choice, by the lack of choice. These human stories got me thinking that we share more than we think we do. Regardless of our nationality, ethnicity, or countries, we're all humans, and we all, in a way or another, share the same struggles. The MEM Summit really made me feel proud to be part of the MEM region. I feel that we could be unified. I started to feel that it's like if my mind has shifted from me thinking of myself as being a citizen of one country to being a citizen of an entire region. I feel like we tend to think of problem solving as being something only experts do. But in reality, with our world changing rapidly, no expert can solve the problem themselves. And especially in a country, you actually need to have all of the stakeholders on the table to make a decision together. Because each person has a citizen expertise and has something in a way or another to contribute to help solve the problem. So I feel that youth should definitely be involved, not only in decision making, but also in other areas of life. Youth are different. Youth have a heart of a community designer. They have the connections needed. They know how to get people together. They know what are the real problems and real issues happening in society. And our policymakers might not even be aware of all these problems, but youth do. Youth have the mind of an innovator and a creative person. And we need that. We need that fresh take on things. We need those innovative solutions. Youth also have the hands. They have the tools. They have the tips, because they have the experience from from their experience on the ground. They've interacted with people. They know what's going on. They know what are the solutions that could help solve the problems better. Our policymakers really need to take this into consideration. Listen to the youth more, interact with the youth, have dialogues with them, conversations, involve them in decision making. You will be surprised.
Wallah bravo. Ahlen biki. What a passionate, what a great testimonial, a representative of the young change maker. That's the most passionate, heartfelt, fresh and enthusiastic, testimonial of what's happening here in Lugano. So we're very proud of you and all of you. And I think that's really a refreshing and very encouraging message that we just heard here. So thank you. Shukran ktir jazilan.
I'm very, very, very happy to see Fatima with the spirit, with the enthusiasm, and with the energy. People say, you're just excited because, it's a conference and you're just going to be here for a few days and then move forward. But I guarantee you, with that energy, this will last, this will continue, and this is here to stay. With these words, now we're going to start a new panel, our second panel for the day, and it's about the role of culture between dialogue and diplomacy. And who is better to moderate it than our own Diana Segantini? So, this is in collaboration with the Oasis International Foundation. And please, now, Diana, Now you change your hats into a moderator. And now I would like to welcome the rest of the speakers here. First, we have Mr. Maurizio Bona, former advisor to the Director General of CERN and professor at the University of Pavia, not Pavia. Welcome. Second, we have Renee Hattar, Director of the Royal Institute of the Interfaith Studies in Jordan. أهلا وسهلا Renee. Renee is online. Do we see her? Yes. Yeah. Do you see us?
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here.
This is wonderful. I always need to hear the people, otherwise I feel like it's on Zoom. Up next, we have Selim Koru, who's an analyst at the Economic Policy Research Foundation in Turkey. Hoş geldiniz. And finally, our representative on this panel, Ines Mokdadi, the young changemaker. Please come along, Ines. Diana, the floor is yours.
شكرا كثير زكريا. أهلا وسهلا, benvenuti. Very happy to have you almost all here. Renee, أهلا وسهلا من الأردن. I'm very honored and delighted to be able to moderate this very important panel that comes, from all of our heart. We heard it from the pro-rector this morning, the essential role of culture, the role of culture that can really, change politics and that is often described as soft power. I think nowadays a lot of people have recognized the amazing power and influence of culture. So the intention of this panel is to highlight the role of culture to really promote this dialogue, collaboration, and even peace, because it's about building bridges. It's about going beyond internal politics and power games. It's really the development and the forging of relationships through the commonalities in culture and religions that have to be looked upon. So we're gonna look at this and have initial statements of our distinguished guests from different perspectives. So everything about, cultural diplomacy in their own areas of specialization, and also going beyond creating connections between science or diplomacy, media, music. So we're going to touch upon all these subjects in this panel. And I would really like to start off with Maurizio Bona, who has been working at the CERN for a long time, but is really as an engineer and as a professor at the University of Pavia. You have lived and analyzed so much what sciences, or the science, in Italian say le scienze, how is the connection or the impact of science in culture and building cultural diplomacy? Please, Professor.
Thank you very much. First of all, welcome. Thank you for having invited me, and I really welcome this invitation. And I'm pleased to talk in particular to young people, in addition to all the others who are here. So as it was said by Diana, I've concluded last year my career at CERN after practically 40 years. But be reassured, I'm not going to talk about the Higgs boson this morning, nor I'm talking about the technology that is often confused with science, which is just a byproduct of science, and not even of science, of particular kind of science research, which is the applied research. I would talk rather about basic science, fundamental science, and in particular about the models that this discipline has evidenced in the creation of the organization I worked for many years, and in other organizations I will tell you. So let me go back to the creation of CERN. And the creation of CERN was done just after the Second World War in order to resume science in Europe after the disaster of the war, but also with the idea to provide a place where people could meet and possibly have a better dialogue among them. And I would like to stress here the point that it was not an endeavor which was launched and completed by scientists only, but it was the result of something that was done by a group of people, far-sighted people, who were from different fields, including politics, diplomacy, economy, but also from culture. And it's not a case that, just a case that CERN's convention is still today in the archives of UNESCO, because UNESCO played an important role there. So the initial idea was to create an organization that was also a mediator of dialogue, and a dialogue through science. And science is culture, because science is, in particular basic science, knowledge, and knowledge is indeed a part of culture. The example of CERN, the idea of CERN, and I will not go into details there, was at a certain point tried to be exported in other fields, because one of the characteristics of CERN was that since the beginning there were the possibility for people coming from different parts of the world, not only from the member states, to meet there and to work together there, fostering the dialogue among them, and in some cases also in a hidden way, the dialogue among countries that were not talking to each other. So this idea to export the model of CERN was done via the proposal, again with the help of UNESCO, to create a new institution for the Middle East, an institution doing something like at CERN, although different, based on accelerators, but an institution that could be, let's say, funded on the basis of the same kind of constitution that is the one of CERN. And this institution is now operating. It's based in Jordan. Its name is Sesame. It was already presented here in 2019. And it's an institution that is trying to do two things, which are the same that were at the basis of the creation of CERN. Doing excellent science in a specific kind of, let's say, research, but also putting together the people who collaborate there. And this is something that was done also with the contribution of CERN via former director generals. I mentioned the plural because there were more than one, and also by the fact that since the creation of this organization, that today is a formal international organization, former director generals of CERN have been the president of the council of the organization. So the idea was to transpose and to see whether it worked in another area, in an area of conflicts, and the result is that it works. I mean, because these people are doing excellent research, but are also offering themselves, but also their countries, a possibility to have a dialogue. There is another attempt, which is presently ongoing with many difficulties, which is to create something similar, although in a completely different field, in the West Balkan area. This project is called SEIST. It was presented also here. It was discussed also with Minister Ignazio Cassis, and it's also having the support of Switzerland in trying to work out in this initial phase the possibility to make this concrete. I would like to complete perhaps my introduction by just mentioning the importance of science for society, not only for the knowledge it provides, but also for the development of the society. And also to mention one thing in which we at CERN, we tried starting about 10 years ago with the idea to become observer to the UN General Assembly to promote a little bit within the multilateral world, which is the fact of proposing science not only as a technical element for the decision makers to take their decisions, but also as, let's say, as a model to perhaps inspire the decision makers, and in particular in the multilateral field, to try to go beyond certain difficulties that very often exist in the multilateral field due to political constraints. So the difference between negotiation and cooperation is something that is really important to try to minimize. And we have been proposing, and we are still proposing ideas about this by using the models that inspire the basic research in particle physics, for instance. And I really conclude now just to tell you something that I think is quite important, because sometimes people claim that science can do everything. In reality, this is not the case, and in particular, it's not the case for sustainable development. And science alone cannot do that, but we have tried to inspire also the other people to propose an idea that just yesterday got a positive result, which is the declaration. Yesterday it was promulgated by the United Nations General Assembly, the declaration to set up a decade of sciences for sustainable development. And I insist on sciences because with the plural, I not only want to mean the basic science, which is the kind of science that we do at CERN, but which also includes social sciences, humanities, culture, and all things. Because we think, we the poor scientists, that only with a common approach to the problems, there is the possibility to find a solution.
Thank you so much. And that's exactly what we heard also before, the role of research, innovation, and combining it with the humanities and science. I think it's an amazing thing. So thank you so much. Grazie mille, Professor. And also just a little personal note, it's an amazing, you just said, we poor scientists. No, not at all. I remember when some years ago we produced with Valerio Jalongo, a great Italian director, who did a documentary at CERN, and the title was Il senso della bellezza, the sense of beauty. So we had great, artists like Anthony Gormley and everything described by the director of CERN, Fabiola, and a lot of scientists. So they were talking about, in a scientific way, but with such passion and such knowledge about the sense of beauty. So I can only recommend that, and that's really great that CERN could sort of have other outlets in Jordan. And that's exactly what we want to talk with Renee Hattar. She's the director of the Royal Institute for Interfaith Studies. And your field of specialization is so inspiring. We talked about science, art, and now we're going to sing or hear about music. Please, Renee, your intervention on the important role of culture. Tfaddali.
Thank you for the kind invitation. I'm so sorry I couldn't be with you in person, but I think technology today is solving so many of our problems. When I started working on music and peace, many people, especially in the academic field, thought this was, music is entertainment. What do you mean music and peace? So to be in the field of peace studies and study peace building and conflict resolution and use music as a method was kind of a new thing when I started 10, 15 years ago. And today, especially with young people, it has proven to be the most useful tool among many of our programs, especially to speak about intercultural, interfaith, and human dialogue. So the idea is to connect peace building to music, because music is a creative, non-violent, and peaceful tool for creating spaces for young people for dialogue. As we know, music is already a tool for dialogue. It helps us communicate. It bridges all the gaps, especially that music has no concern for differences among people from different backgrounds, different religions, different colors. Sometimes we communicate even if the music has no words, just the tunes. We consider the beauty of the music, and the music, because of its nature, forces us to listen to each other. So if you apply let's just say the rules of dialogue to music and vice versa, you can see that it is such a wonderful tool in that sense for communication and for creating a culture of peace within society. So I started with a thesis when I was studying, just thinking about music for dialogue and peacebuilding, but also to speak about interfaith dialogue through sacred music by studying all the different ecclesiastical traditions in the Middle East, and speak about Sufi music as well. In that sense, I concentrated also on the language and identity of Middle Eastern people, which is so diverse and so pluralistic. But yet we all speak one common language today, which is the Arabic language, which can also have so many words and such a big, huge, and rich terminology of peace. So when you combine the tunes and the melodies to a message of peace, this could also help us with this communication we're talking about, because you reach to inner peace, you reach to reconciliation, you reach to a safe space where people can identify but also express themselves, especially the young people. And this is exactly what we need to spread today. In many of our trainings and workshops, we found out that many of young people have difficulty in expressing themselves, not just to listen carefully to what the other is saying, but also to express how they feel, what are their concerns, how to express their feelings. That's why music in exercise of social, emotional learning and education have also served us to use music to learn and play as well. So it's such a creative method that helped us so much, whether here in my work at the Royal Institute for Turkish Studies or in my field of studies, to use it for, as I said, peace building, because when I talk about peace building, I talk about the prevention of conflict. Conflict resolution, to me, is so difficult once the conflict is there. There's really so little that we can do. While if we try to prevent the conflict, spread a culture of peace among society, try to help young people to apply non-violence rather than violence, since music can also give some tranquility and help them solve their problems with I don't know, maybe to reflect a little bit and count, as you say, until 10 before you go ahead and do any kind of exaggerated reaction in any situation. So we have used it with kids, we have used it with adults, and usually the results are really promising. So the most recent project I'm working on at Royal Institute using music is with a group of Iraqi Christian refugees living in Jordan. And we are using music to teach kids and young people to give them a creative activity where they can fill their free time, and also to have an instrument, to have this skill and to be able to express themselves. Using this instrument, using their voices, to sing together, but also to create a space to meet with other Jordanians, peers of their own age, and discuss things, listen together to music, express their culture, their identity. Why in this specific accent in Arabic? Why from this area? How is it different? How are the percussions? How are the feelings expressed differently? Is it the environment? Is it the geography? Is it the nature of the people? So this is how rich music can express culture. And this is how we can spread this culture within society. So just to conclude, before I take too much of the panel's time, music can be considered as a creative and non-violent method to create small and imperfect spaces, even if only for brief moments, to an oasis beyond our stress, our problems, and our daily conflict. These moments of peace can affect us both through the language of peace expressed in the lyrics of the songs and the chants, and through the music that can bring us closer to the inner peace we all seek. These beautiful and peaceful musical spaces can leave a mark of tranquility, happiness, and love that impact each person in different ways and at different levels, consequently distancing us from violence and bringing us closer.
Shukran كتير. Thank you so much. And I think we could really hear, how convinced and you are about the universal language of music and the power that can, be transposed by music, by transferring skills, as you said, with this very concrete project. And I think I remember also in one of the seminars in the last few years, there were also instruments and music involved. So I think it's an important tool also to break down boundaries, to break the ice, to have something in common. So thank you so much, shukran ktir. I would like to pass on the word to Selim Koru, who's got a fascinating background. You're an analyst at Economic Policy Research Foundation of Turkey, so a lot about, foreign policy research institute as well, diplomacy, politics. But on the other hand, you also write in the interesting newsletter, Kulturkampf. Maybe you can say a couple of words on this. And especially, he's working on the dissertation on Nietzsche's politics. So you see that it's not only culture, but it's philosophy. And so I'm very curious to listen to your introduction on this panel about the importance of culture and diplomacy.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for that very kind introduction. Thanks for having me in this beautiful city. I think it's interesting. Our first speaker spoke about science. Our second speaker about music. If I could do anything in this world, I'd like to do beautiful music or high science. I think those are sort of, that is high culture. That is, I believe at least, the highest things we can do as human beings on this earth. I write about political culture, so popular culture and specifically nationalism, which can be less pleasant. And yes, the way I came to it, I suppose, is telling of what I write about, because I do have this sort of more technical background. I studied history in my undergrad, and then I did some journalism, started working for think tanks, started working for this very technical economic research institute in Ankara. And I went to grad school at Johns Hopkins at a very sort of technical program, and I learned in a very short time, it's like an MBA for bureaucrats. So they teach you how, your economics courses, comparative political science. You are taught sort of how to write very brief, crisp memos. You're really supposed to be sort of a very efficient cog in these machines. And this was also a time when Turkey's relations with globalization and with Western countries was going rather well, right? What European countries especially always sort of want is for a popularly elected leader to be very sort of institutions oriented and sort of be very technical and work with them on these issues bit by bit and have sort of long-term patience. And that seemed to be the case in Turkey during the 2000s and perhaps the early 2010s. And I was involved in some of these processes. I was seconded to our foreign ministry during the G20, for example. Turkey was hosting the G20, so wrote a lot of memos, did very technical stuff. And in general, I was writing sort of evidence-based sorts of things, but more and more, I guess it also was about my country's sort of trajectory, the political trajectory we took. I became disillusioned with the whole process, and I started to think more about political culture, the way we frame things, why people want the things they want politically. That, to me, was the more important question. Because the questions that were being asked was always were more in the line of, how can we make this more technical? How can we make this more efficient? right? Because the assumption is, and this is sort of a post-Cold War mindset, this is especially the case in the 1990s, I believe, and then in the 2000s, and it's sort of dissolving a little bit. The assumption is that sort of, I think the way Fukuyama or somebody else like that put it, you want to get to Denmark, right? You want to get to this state of sort of an advanced state of modernity, right? And how you get there is largely a technical issue, and you sort of deal with that. And I more and more found out that that's not necessarily the case. People may not want that, because the assumption was always that, okay, you know, Turkey, this country, wants to be sort of included deeper and deeper into globalized structures, that it wants to make its way up the global value chains, like, for example, South Korea did or Japan did, right? And more I started to think, maybe not, right? Maybe it's more complicated than that. Maybe countries want different things. For example, last year when Russian forces had surrounded Ukraine, I remember I was in London and I was at this very, very nice dinner, and there were lots of people there who were sort of big-time writers and editors and think tankers, people who sort of were listened to. And our host sort of went around the room and said, okay, who thinks Russia is going to invade Ukraine? And I think everybody said that Russia would not invade, that this was an irrational thing to do, because ultimately President Putin was more interested in his economy, was ultimately interested in sort of being a more social leader. I think everybody had their version of sort of, this is irrational. It didn't get to me. It didn't get to me. But, and not to sort of disparage any of those people or to think less of them. I do think quite highly of many of them. But the next day, I believe the next day or the day after, Russia invaded Ukraine, right? They took an enormous hit to their economy. They are now facing lots of sanctions. It's in doubt whether they will be able to pull off even a partial victory, right? But they did what they did because they believed in certain things, right? And to me, political culture is about sort of thinking about those things, thinking about you know, why we politically sort of want these things, and yeah, how to think of those situations going forward.
Thank you so much. I mean, this is a very concrete approach at the on the one hand, but philosophical and linked also to identity, diversity, and all of these very important topics within culture. Whatever unites us, or what's the rationale behind the more political forged reasoning. So I think the field that you're in is very important, and we're going to talk about it in a second, just in a dialogue on the panel. I would like to give the word to Ines Mokdadi from Tunisia. Ahla wa sahla wa Lugano. And you're really focusing on a very important topic, and that's the power of language skills. How do we use our language? How do we use the words? How do we use media? What are the different models also to promote dialogue or understanding different transformative initiatives, as you do in Tunisia? I think that's your main focus. Would you like to give us your take on the power of culture, please?
My research, like I do uncover the ideologies using discourse analysis and the role of culture in shaping and framing the people's minds and the narratives as well. So I do agree on using, for example, the Nietzschean background. I'm a big fan of Nietzsche's, like Zarathustra, for example. Indeed, like culture is a soft power, and at times, like when we are doing policy making, we tend to overlook the its primordial aspect in shaping people's narrative. For example, in my research, when I'm seeing when I'm tracing the folkloric ideological proverbs that we do have in Tunisia right now, and Tunisian Arabic is becoming a language. If you are doing a linguistic research in the laboratory, it's no longer a dialect. So you can take that the option of multiculturalism even within our low-key cultural model, which is the folkloric proverbs. So at times, if you are tending to analyze a proverb, or like you focus on the linguistic segment of each statement, you would be really appalled and surprised how so many powers and how so many cultures, they just intervene in one word, like in one word. A simpler exercise I've done, like with my colleagues here, for example, especially with my Italian colleagues, they were so astonished how I have this Italian accent without studying accent, or Italian at all. Why? Because like in Tunisia, we tend to be more sonorous. Like we are resonating a bit with the Romance languages because of our, multicultural history. But I was asking them each and every time, how do you say this in Italian? Maybe like in Sicilian dialect, or like in Milanese dialect, or is it like us? Do you say the same word? Do you have a different word? What do you call this item? And I was struck. There is a cultural linguistic, like what do we call, like sociolinguistic proximity, even when you are just like saying one word. And this is one of the soft powers that we tend to overlook. It's like when you want to approach a people, the first thing that you're gonna do is that you're gonna hit their own culture. I remember, like from studying, for example, the French history, one of the French strategies, like when colonizing Tunisia, is building French schools. Education is so good. Education is one of the processes that make you inherently learn the language, but as well the ethics of the language. And there is a process as well, what do we call in linguistics, the ization, for example, Arabization, Americanization, maybe Italianization of languages. And this process actually plays on identity politics, which uncovers ideologies, but at the same time, it infiltrates within the culture of the people. Culture is everywhere, it's inescapable, it's inevitable. If you are going to be approaching the people, if you want to, like, for example, govern a certain city, if you want to do politics, what's the first medium you're going to use? Language. And language is but a cultural means. So, culture, for me, is like a great tool to initiate and to work on diplomacy, and as well as a trust-building process. Because, for example, if I'm going to break the ice with my people, I would call onto their own narratives, onto their own cultures, and thus, like, we have a kind of trust-building model, at the same time, peace-building one in the end.
Shukran. That's very well said. Big round of applause. And it's really about storytelling. It's really about, finding the common language, not only, technicalities in the language, but it's really the narrative, the identity building that is so much inherent in all the cultures, maybe Swiss, or especially, in the Middle East, with the Arabic and general Middle Eastern narratives. That is, an inherent part of the culture. And I would like to take, your point of view also back to Renee Hattar, and maybe also to Professor Maurizio Bona. First, Renee, what do you think about this power of narrative, and how would that translate into very concrete projects? You said, you know, you have this project of music for Iraqi Christians. So this is very, very specific, linked to the identity of, you know, a fragment of a population. How do you think music is forging that storytelling and identity building of an entire population or culture?
As I said, each culture, each country, even smaller communities within the same culture have their own way of expressing themselves through music. So music is just one among all the languages that we were just talking about, where people express themselves. So when you are away from your homeland, the first thing you fear is the loss of your identity, is the loss of this environment where you used to express yourself in that way, in these words, with these people. So once you change your environment, you're afraid of, especially for the newer generations and the younger generations, of this change that Ines was just talking about. Would they be different in a different culture? Would they have to change this language? Would they have to change their own terminology because they're living with different people with different terminology? So keeping the narrative and understanding the richness of this narrative, preserving it to themselves, but yet enriching it with the other cultures, with the other new, let's say, environments they are living in, is very, very important. That's why the trust building we were just talking about is a very, very important part of this process. So once you explore their own music and their own stories and their own narrative, and exchange it with the other stories to see the similarities, the common values, but also the differences, which in music come in a, let's just say, a positive approach, rather than trying to change and preserve your own identity and you learn from the others. You don't change, you don't have to change.
Thank you so much, shukran. Maybe Professor Maurizio Bona, you know, we always tend to think in order to concepts to be accepted, you know, on a general level, it's not enough to have soft power. So that's why culture is like, yeah, it's nice to have, but now we've seen, you know, the really important facts that is actually almost scientifically researched, and we see the great values and outcomes of culture. Would you have any scientifically, you know, based positive outcomes, maybe in cultural diplomacy or in the sciences, you know, that really do actually, go and forge the fact that culture is a positive tool for multilateralism, diplomacy, and peace building?
Oh yes, thank you for your question, which touches indeed very important points. But I would like also to link to what was said before by sharing, in particular, with the young people present here, because I think that it's important also to be proud of failures. One of the the most important failures I had in my professional or my life, let's say, which concerns really music. Because I tried, when I was advisor to the previous Director General of CERN, to have an orchestra as ambassador for CERN. And this orchestra was not selected by chance, but as I followed it a few times and I knew a little bit the story, it is the orchestra that was founded by Daniel Barenboim, the Divan Orchestra in the Middle East. So I got in touch through friends to the collaborators of Barenboim, who spoke to him. Finally, we had the director of the foundation that manages the orchestra, who came to CERN. We met together with the Director General. I brought him to visit the organization, and in particular the accelerator and the detector. And then things did not succeed. And this was really very bad, because I think that the message that orchestra in particular, but music can bring, is really a very important one. For instance, in some of my lectures, I remind a sentence that Barenboim really stated during a famous concert in Ramallah in 2005, when he wanted to explain why he thinks that music itself cannot bring peace, although this orchestra is considered as an ambassador for peace, or the orchestra for peace. And he said something which is very similar to what we can say in our scientific world, which is that music in itself cannot bring peace, but it can bring the courage to understand the narrative of the others. And this is really a very important point. And I would like to conclude this comment by going a bit further, because it's clear that universal languages like science, like music, like sport to some extent, can be positive examples. But I think that the problem is that we should not limit ourselves to the narrative of how important this is, but we should try to understand why the policymakers are not capable to include some of these, let's say, models that are proper to the world of science, the world of music and sport, that might, in some cases, of course, help, let's say, minimizing the risks of going into deadlocks in the solution of the big problems of society.
Thank you so much, Professor. And I just got goosebumps because I was privileged enough to actually assist to the East-West Diwan concert in Ramallah. And I remember, and I know Daniel Barenboim very well, and his, in the beginning it was a bit, shocking when he said, no, music doesn't have the power to actually really change. But then he adapted his discourse, and it's really about this trigger. And I think, we're all realistic. We all know that it's not only, nice to have culture and arts and makes, life more beautiful, but it's really about, triggering diverse mentalities, diverse approaches into thinking, and having this dialogue that you had during this seminar in the last 10 days. So thank you so much for reminding us of this. Spoken of this, very specific issues about, music, about language. Selim, where do you think, you as an analyst, doing so much research about, foreign policy and these more hard facts of policy making, where do you see maybe 2 points of where cultural diplomacy could actually make things happen in your own country, seeing, the realpolitik right now or in the past 2 years. What is the role of, culture in Turkey, and how could this modify maybe also the perception of some political hard issues in your own country?
Yeah, so there's several things. One, you always have to ask yourself, how is politics relating to culture, right? Because politics needs a culture, right? Because we live in the age of popular nationalism, right? And this goes back, it isn't just something that's been happening for a few generations, it's been happening for some time. And that's why, for example, my blog is named Kulturkampf, as in sort of the German word from the 19th century. I've sort of Turkified it, right? Because in Turkish we'd say Kültür rather than Kultur, and then switch that around. Very clever of me. But the thing is, the idea of the Kulturkampf is that as a statesman, you look at the world around you, and then you say, okay, I can take these cultural tools, right, and I can shape them to my ends, right? I can shape reality to where I want things to go, right? So you can employ music for your political goals, right? the most basic thing is, for example, every election campaign will have a few sort of pieces of music that accompany it, right? In Turkey, at least, that's a very big thing. Or the latest movie that's going around, Oppenheimer, right, is an example of how high science has been employed by the political sphere, right? They sort of take all these scientists. I haven't seen it, but they take all these scientists, put them in a city, and say, okay, build us the atomic bomb, right? And these are scientists. Most scientists at the time actually were sort of leftists. They were very skeptical of government power, but they said okay, and they built this thing, right? Now we have different challenges, right? AI and social media and all these things. Feats of engineering, not science, but nonetheless, the priorities of the political sphere will drive the priorities of science a lot of times. And my understanding is that CERN is a sort of an attempt to reverse that to some extent. But that is a thing that's very difficult to reverse, right? So there's always going to be that aspect of things. And in terms of sort of how things are in Turkey in relation to this, I mean the culture wars, right, are considered to be sort of things that are within countries, right? Every country has its own culture war, and it's waged over elections and specific sort of policy issues like abortion, for example, in the United States. But more and more, what I think is happening is that the culture war is spreading, right? In this sort of what people call the clash of civilizations or whatever. You can put it different ways. Right, but yeah, I think countries like mine have a geopolitical agenda that can't be reduced to a material end, right? That can't be reduced to like, this country really wants Mediterranean energy, gas export. If you look at it that way, you're always going to look for little sort of tweaks and compromises and things like that, right? And you're probably going to miss the bigger picture. Because, the liberal assumption is, okay, if we sit across the table and talk enough, right? Ad infinitum, at some point, you get to a solution. That might not be the case. People might be wanting different things, and those things might be clashing, right? And I think that is becoming more and more pronounced around Turkey, my own country, but also sort of other places. Yeah. And I guess we'll see what happens with that.
Thank you very much. And I think it's not so much about clashing, but it's exactly this concept of having a dialogue, intercultural dialogue. Dialogue is, you don't necessarily need to agree, on everything, but it's just, keeps flowing and enriching with each, ad infinitum argument. You may or you may not come to a conclusion, but at least there is a flow. And I think Ines, just before opening the floor to the audience, and there's a mic there as well for your questions. Ines, we just talked about IA and all the technological advancement, and you as a specialist for intercultural language skills. How do you think the power of words or language will be sort of, lowered or altered by all these new technologies, maybe even scientifically shown new practices? Please.
That's the most debated kind of question now in the academia. Like, if you are into the humanistic approach right now in the academia, you're fearing this kind of artificial intelligence, different scope of wording. because we know that the artificial intelligence machines, they are trained on a certain data. I mean, there is an input and there is an output, as we do in linguistics. Personally, what I think of is that if this machine is trained using human resources, like a human input, it's gonna generate a sort of complex reality of this kind of language, but still it lacks the human, what we call like the human tinge in language or in culture. It lacks the cultural localization. And once I wanted to test, for example, like ChatGPT in a translation exercise, and I found like there are some spots missing when it comes to contextualization and to localization purposes. For example, if you are going to be so oriented into like cultural studies, like, okay, it does a very creative job when it comes to technicalities, you know, those diplomatic texts and everything, but when it comes like to literature or when it comes to cultural studies, you know, texts, it's a bit awkward. Yeah, it's like linguistically awkward. So yeah, as a researcher, I'm really fearing this huge step of the artificial intelligence. Maybe like they are gonna be trained, you know, like they are asking for more input every time. But I would say like cautiously optimistic. Because like there is some sections of youth, they try to make, you know, this challenge a bit not that leveraged, for example, or not that leveled up. But I want to emphasize a point which is really good, for example, like for the role of culture, especially in this overriding way of artificial intelligence, which is, for example, we have to focus on cultural programs. It's like, okay, we do have like this artificial intelligence machine. You can do this cultural approximation to things. But still, for example, as a researcher, as part of academia, I try to embed as much as I can cultural programs. For example, I was a Fulbrighter. And I was an Erasmus Plus, like, exchange delegate. So, and I remember every time if I'm gonna do a cultural table or I'm gonna host like a cultural table, it's really beneficial for me and for the attendees. So this is maybe kind of a counter current to this overriding way of artificial intelligence. So, yeah. Having more cultural programs, more academic programs, using the music. I remember like our group in the MEM used a scenario like using the music from all the MEM regions so that we can present how music can travel well, can bond people together, dancing on the dabka, dancing on the jandabi type of music. So it was so good and it was invigorating. So this is my takeaway on that.
Thank you so much. Mm-hmm. Just a quick take from almost the other side. We know that there are no, boundaries between scientists and intercultural, analysts or researchers like you are. But just in 2 minutes, what's your take as an engineer, and a researcher on this whole AI cultural approach?
I don't know why, but I was expecting this question. No, I mean, I have a mixed feeling. First of all, I'm not an expert in AI, so I cannot say things that are certainly interesting. But I would like to come to what you said concerning the language, because this is an important point. And if you allow me, I would like to mention an anecdote, which is that the first time I started dealing with the UN, and also CERN started dealing with the UN, in particular in New York, I had the impression that they were completely crazy. Simply, I didn't understand what they were saying, and very likely they did not understand what we, from the point of view of CERN, were saying. So language is really a very important element. And finding languages that might be understandable by the two or more parties involved is very important. But if you allow me, I would like to go a little bit beyond, because we are talking about culture and also about how to use for instance, the technology that is developed by science, by applied science. And I would like here to tell, in particular, the young participants that, in my opinion, it's important to know about the language to be used, but it's even more important to be free to speak as you feel in reality. Because there is nothing more than sincerity that can help the dialogue among people. And sometimes by going a little bit too far with the search of the perfect dialogue, you risk to enter into a negative, let's say, situation in which, let's say, politically correctness or mainstream becomes prevailing. So my overall opinion on AI is that it is a technological tool that can be used for the bad or for the good by humans. And it is important that really the human aspect comes out with a language which is really what you think, with no fear of breaking some usual, let's say, way of approaching problems with new ideas. And last thing, with the intent always to build up trust, which is something that you said before.
Thank you so much. This is trust. It's a very strong word, and that's, you know, the basics of all, you know, relations and dialogues. Now I would like to open up the floor to the distinguished guests. The microphone is just over there. Please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
First of all, thank you for a very insightful panel. My name is Ghida Roussan. I'm from Jordan. And my question is mainly about the potential challenges that could arise when we use culture as a tool for diplomacy. So as highlighted by Dr. Renee, music is a great example of a medium, a cultural medium that is capable of fostering peaceful dialogue. From your perspective, do certain types of cultural mediums pose potential challenges when employed for diplomatic purposes? Thank you.
شكرا. تفضلي, Dr. Renee. Would you like to answer this?
Yes, thank you. I'm trying to think of other cultural mediums that you might be referring to. I don't know. Even music itself, I mean, if it's negatively deployed, or as you just said, using or interpreting some kind of ideologies, of course, then any medium can pose challenges, especially if we think of the language. So Ines was just mentioning the idea of teaching a language to change a narrative, for instance. So I think it's the way you deploy any of these tools that can pose challenges or not. Sometimes the expressions we use, even among different groups in the same society or host society versus, for example, the example I gave about refugees. The exact same expressions might mean something in our nature, in our environment, and might mean something totally different in the other environment. So the language itself, whether music, whether the dialect, whether the way we were applying it, can pose many challenges in that sense.
Shukran. Thank you. Another question? The mic is free. Yes, please.
Hello.
Faddal.
Hi, my name is Adnan. I'm from Morocco. Thank you again for this wonderful panel. My question again would like to follow on my fellow colleague here. I know you have focused only on how music can be, mainly on how music can be used as a medium for peace building, how can it connects, it connects people together. I'm an artist, and I regularly use music to express, my cultural identity and share either my story or my community story. So, that we can, once we were trying to create a peaceful, let's say creative piece, we tend to view things through our own subjective views. How can I or other artists effectively acknowledge and integrate the other side or the other person perspective in narrative in creating, an artistic, peaceful message that can resonate with everyone without being in conflict with my own? Thank you.
I think that's a big question, but the key word is to listen. Usually we think we are listening to the other, but usually it takes a lot of patience, of skills, of love, and of being ready, this readiness of the intention of listening to the other, to know them really closely, to build that trust, to be able to understand their own narrative. This closeness that the art in general and music in particular brings when we are together in a musical project is exactly what helps us to reach that point that you were just trying to ask about. So it's a process, it takes time and patience, and it takes a lot of readiness to get to know the other. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. It was really congratulations, Mabrouk, a great question. And I think not only addressed to Renee Hattar, because we're coming to the end of this panel, maybe if each of the panelists would like to give their very brief answer to this question, because it's all about, forging identity and your cultural background. Would you like to give a last statement before we come to the end of this panel? Very brief. Maurizio, we start with you.
Oh, yes. I would like perhaps just to stress again what I've just said. I think that science in particular is a part of the cultural patrimony of humanity, that together with other kinds of cultures can help the dialogue and peace. We have had some examples in the world of science, which I mentioned, some of them I mentioned. But I think it's really important to use the dimension of these cultures that pertains to the build of trust among people. Because this is the only real motor that can make things happening in diplomacy, in politics, and in other things. And the real challenge is to make such that this is not just left to a level of a narrative, but it's something that goes really to the policymakers. This is something that we have tried to do. And I think I invite also the young people to do the same with their experience, to try to make such that the policymakers include some of their messages and models into their way of operating.
Thank you. Selim, Ines, very short last statements, please, and then we close.
Okay, very briefly. I found the question very interesting. It was almost as if you're expressing your own opinion, but then you sort of feel bad for not being able to express the other person's opinion, so you want to incorporate that as well. I think what we owe other people is our genuine opinions, the way we hold them. And we owe them, of course, also to listen to them and come to our own opinion by listening to them, among other things. But if we have strong disagreements, we should be able to express those in whatever way we do, be it in writing or artistic expression or other things. I'd encourage you to just make your music.
Teşekkürler. Ines, closing
just
word.
like very simply, if we are fearing, for example, some music will override our own type of music or our own musical narrative, we just be maybe sticking around our own cultural norms of music, but at the same time be open to other types of music. This is like the great thing about the cultural component, is you have to be open when it comes to your cross-cultural takeaway. Be open, but at the same time preserve your own heritage. This is part of the identity.
Wonderful. It couldn't have been a more poignant closing words. So also thank you so much, Renee Hattar, for joining via Skype. You heard music is a central topic here at the Swiss Forum of the Middle Eastern Summit here in Lugano. So we really hope Ahla wa Sahla next year here in Lugano. And thank you so much for giving the power and the place for culture to make a better world. Thank you.